Okay. Yes. I want to welcome you today to this event, the public procurement training session on the Norwegian health sector. My name is Jouni Karlsson, and I work for Business Finland in Norway. And if you have any questions regarding the Norwegian market whatsoever, you are more than welcome to contact me. You can ask my business card later on, who did not get it in the beginning. And I just want to mention that this is now the second of 3 trainings. We had the Swedish training last month, and now we are going through the public procurement in health sector in Norway. And then 9th January at 1 o'clock, we're going to have the same training regarding Denmark, also held in Helsinki. Also, the Swedish or the Sweden training, it's available on Business Finland homepages, so you are more than welcome to see the training if you missed that one on our homepages. And if you have any questions regarding the presentation during this time, so you may ask general questions during the presentation, but if it's more specific, I kindly ask you to leave those questions after the presentation. And I now leave the floor to Espen Bakken and Christine Nesse from a law firm called Untitled. Thank you.
Thank you, Jouni. First of all, thank you for having us. We are extremely pleased to be here in Helsinki. And on our way over, we thought to ourselves, how can we impress Finns? And what did we do? We Googled, obviously. And what did we find? That was how to date Finnish women, how to date Finnish men, and we also find a blog spot in which a Finnish girl had 5 introductory remarks to Finns. So we feel at least we know how we will react to some of what we are actually saying. That being said, first of all, we are a Norwegian law firm specialized in certain sectors. Public procurement is one of the backbones of the law firm in also competition law and European Union law. And I will shortly just speak on the Norway and its relation to the EEA. But this task has been given to us to provide you with, I won't say a brief, but at least an introduction into the Norwegian public procurement legislation, and in particular in the healthcare sector and wellness or welfare sector. During this presentation, you are more than welcome to ask us general questions. We will try to answer as good as possible. There are some technical issues surrounding this event, meaning that you will need to have a microphone, or I will repeat the question and then answer and so forth. Or if you have any specific questions regarding your specific company or a specific issue which is not like general, we can take that either in a short break during the presentation or after the presentation. But just raise your hand and we'll try to see it, and then we stop, and then we have that conversation. First of all, this is just like marketing brag, so we just skip it, that one as well. This presentation is concerning, as we said, public procurement legislation in Norway. We will provide you first with a short introduction. Thereafter, we will basically say that how does procurement really work in Norway, and then we have some specific issues, in particular in relation to to the healthcare sector and the introduction and implementation of the GDPR in Norway, as I understand also is an issue in Finland, in particular in relation to home care and that like. There is, I won't say skepticism, but at least there are some issues in relation to the Norwegian government and regional health authorities' approach. In that relation, we have assisted a couple of multinationals, among others also some sitting in this room, with their relation and procurements in Norway. And it has been a major obstacle in Norway, the introduction of the GDPR and the somewhat passive-aggressive approach of the Norwegian government. But we will revert to that later on. So, first, the legislative framework. This is the Norwegian Parliament, where some says everything happens in relation to EEA law. Hardly nothing happens in this Parliament. Everything happens in Brussels. First, I think it's important for you to understand and also touch a bit on your home ground, really, in the sense that public procurement in Norway, that is EEA law. So the directives in the EU, as they are implemented into the EEA agreement for procurements above the EEA threshold, is EEA and Norwegian law. And that is, in my view, a good starting point or a point of departure for you to know, because at the end of the day, the material aspects of the procurement regulation in Norway is EEA law, and I believe it's the same as it is in Finland as well. So we will not go into lots of details, but as we said, we will provide you with a brief overview. So in that sense, we have the Directive 2004/18, which is then obviously what we, at least in Norway, call the classical directive. We have directives on defense and procurement, defense and security procurements. We have directives on service concessions and utility directives. All of them are a part of the EEA agreement. All of them are taken on board into the Norwegian legislation, and all of them are now independent regulations under the auspices of the Norwegian Public Procurement Act itself. So that is, for you, in my view at least, a fairly good starting point. As you know, Norway is a member to the EEA agreement. It's not a party to the EU, but the EU and the member states are a party to the EEA. So what kind of animal is that? You know yourself because you've been there and you shifted sides, so to speak. So I won't elaborate a lot of that, but as you are aware, it is an international agreement. It does not have any direct effect in Norway, as the directives has in Finland. So in that sense, we have the EFTA Surveillance Authority surveying the implementation of the procurement directives in Norway, and we have the EFTA Court, who are basically providing judgments, or handing down, as they like to call it, judgments on procurements in Norway. The sister organizations, the big sister or the big brother, is obviously for you, the European Commission and the ECJ in Brussels and Luxembourg. But there is some sort of a two-pillar system in the EEA, which provides for equal treatment and homogeneity among the EU member states, including the EEA member states. So obviously, EU courts, and by that I mean both national courts, like the Finnish Supreme Court, the Swedish Supreme Court, the Greek Supreme Court, Bundeskartellamt in Germany, or any other courts in Luxembourg, is relevant for the application of the Norwegian understanding and the Norwegian interpretation of the procurement regulations. So that is also, at least for Norwegian lawyers as well, it's a bit of a challenge, because when do you know when you have all the relevant sources, so to speak? So in that sense, state liability in Norway, as in Finland, is based on the Frankovich doctrine from the European Court of Justice, and all that kind of in-house service providers and so forth is also based on the EU courts and EU jurisprudence. So it's not like a regulation and a legal framework which is divided and separate from the EU regulations. It's virtually the same. But it's important because we have thresholds in Norway. When procuring the services and goods, you have thresholds in which there will be intra-community trade. At least that is what is perceived. And there is some sort of a systematic approach to the act itself, because the Procurement Act is applicable to all procurements, regardless of whether it's utilities, regardless the defense and security, classical directives, service concessions, and that like. The Act is applicable. Okay, and the Act is applicable for all goods and services with a value above 100,000 NOK. And then the question is obviously, how do you calculate the thresholds? But I believe if you are interested in a Norwegian procurement, I would believe that at least it would be above 100, not a million, but 100,000 NOK. So that is basically the scope of the Act itself. You have some other exceptions, which is not relevant in this fora, but in particular in defense and that like, not everything is covered. But that being said, under the Procurement Act, we have the Procurement Regulation. And the Procurement Regulations is divided in all practical sense into three parts: Part 1, Part 2, and Part 3. And Part 1 of the Act, the regulation, has virtually the same scope as the Act itself. It lays down basically general principles which provides you guys with rights and the contracting authorities with obligations. Whereas Part 2 procurements are basically national procurements, which is all procurements below the EU threshold. And above the EU threshold, the EU directive kicks in, and it's perceived to have an intra-community trade. So looking at the thresholds, this is basically a copy-paste from a Norwegian website, the Ministry of Industry and Fisheries. And I point now to these thresholds. I thought I knew how to do this, but I don't, obviously. You can say that for central governments, which is up here, you have a threshold of 1.3 million. That is the national or the EU threshold. So all procurements with a value above 1.3 million shall be conducted in accordance with Part 3 of the regulation. Whereas for regional and local authorities, you have a threshold of 2 million NOK. So these two thresholds are important to note, because if there are procurements in Norway with a value below 1.3 or 2 million, they shall be, or the contracting authorities, they are obliged to publish this in Tenders European Daily in order to have a European-wide spread, so to speak, of the procurement. And that is important for you guys. I believe that you have your subscriptions to Marcel, EU Supply, or whatever, in order to subscribe to these TED announcements, so to speak. And then you can pick up, and if it's not conducted, it's not published in accordance with the regulations, the procurement itself is void. So for you, if you would like to enter into the Norwegian market, if you're not already there, it is important to know that these thresholds are applicable both to central governments, 1.3, and 2 million for local and regional governments. We also have certain other thresholds, which is not relevant here, like a construction project and so forth, but I will not mention that in this project or in this presentation. So from a practical point of view, in order to sum up the legislative framework, EU law is Norwegian law, i.e. Norwegian law is EU law for all procurements above the EU thresholds. And from a material point of view, or a substance point of view, it will be the same rules in Norway as in Finland, as in Sweden, Denmark, and for at least a couple of weeks more, the UK. So that is how we have a short introduction into the legislative framework and the thresholds. Before I embark upon the short introduction of the contracting authorities, would you have any general questions in relation to the applicable legal framework, or there's a hand raising over there. And now, Joni, you need to step up.
I'm Janne Pitkänen, representing a company called Adusso, and we are in the healthcare business, sometimes providing usability assurance. And to start with usability assurance for health IT systems, basically. So to get started with our customers, which are usually in public sector, it's good to know which are the practical thresholds to go below them to get started. But this 100K Norwegian crowns is very low. I think are there something in between, like here it's 60K in euro, which is the threshold it's needed to, you need to publish request for proposals like nationally. So is there more information, or are those basically the same converted to Norwegian crowns which are applicable here?
The thing is, and I understand the question as related to, is there something in between 100 and 1.3 or 2 million?
Exactly.
Yeah, and we used to have that, a national threshold, but in a revision 1.5 years ago, that was removed. So the national threshold and the EU threshold is virtually, or it is the same.
Okay, but that's good to know, because it might make some things a bit easier as well.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks a lot.
But that being said, in relation to part 1, part 2, and part 3 of the regulation, if you have a procurement then below the EU thresholds, you are obviously also obliged to publish that also, but only in the Norwegian equivalent of TED, which is, in our words, Doffin.
Yeah.
Which is some sort of a silly name, but at least it works in Norway.
Okay.
Okay.
Tusen takk.
Thanks. Any other general questions? One more. I think at least when we are such a small group, might be a lot of on the web as well, but but at least it's good to have some questions and have some sort of a dialogue.
Hi, Katrina from BrainCare. Quick question. So are all the procurements having the same window time span as they do in here, like a 4-year floating window?
In terms of...
Of the threshold limits?
I understand your question, just for the audience also. I understand your question as the length of a framework agreement. Normally, the main rule is a 4-year at the maximum. But you can have lower. You can have what is normally you have 2 years, and then you have an option of 1+1. But you also have, to a certain extent, you need to have some, how to put it, investments up front. You can have longer framework agreements also in Norway. So in certain sector, in particular in the IT infrastructure for healthcare, you have agreements which are much longer than 4 years. Answered your question? Partly? Okay, fine. Then we move on to the contracting authorities. So in the healthcare sector, who are the contracting authorities in Norway? And that is somewhat, in my view, at least important to know about. We have a central, a regional, and a local level, as I believe you have also here in Finland, but on the procurement side. And the main contracting authority in Norway in relation to the healthcare sector would be what we call sykehusinnkjøp. And that is basically a centralized procurements. They are owned by the regional health authorities. In Norway, we have four: Health Southeast, Health West, Health Mid-Norway, and Health North. That is the four regional health authorities. And they have basically joined forces and established sykehusinnkjøp, which is then a centralized body for national framework agreements. So they are procuring all sorts from pharmaceuticals to surgical equipment to band-aids and all that kind of thing, ambulances on behalf of the regional health authorities. So they are doing quite a lot of massive investments and procurements in the Norwegian market. And they are extremely important to get to know them and get to interact with them. They are using, or they have become more professional in my view, and that's my personal opinion. Or the two of us and our law firm represent suppliers to the healthcare sector. We do not represent the contracting authorities, but through a variety of suppliers, we get to know the healthcare authorities quite well. And in our view, they have established a real good administrative practice. The procurements are carried out, in my view, on a professional level. Normally you have certain categories and with reference groups from the different hospitals. The procurement itself is carried out fairly good. They are also, as I've stated, they are approachable. It's not like behind walls and just roll out the ball when there's a procurement. They are in the market, they are interested in developing their supplies, and they have conducted and are conducting a lot of market dialogue. So if you look at the web page of Sykehusinnkjøp, you will see the current agreements and the upcoming tenders and the dates for the market dialogues. And the market dialogue can be carried out in different ways, really. You can have some sort of a seminar where they present their categories, or you can have a one-to-one meetings, and that like. Depends really on the category procured. That being said, once the contract is signed, in particular on framework agreements, there is an issue. Because this is a centralized body, they're not a party to the agreement itself. The party to the agreements are the hospitals, and they are the ones signing the agreements, and they are the contracting party to you guys. There is an issue of loyalty to the agreements, where the hospitals feels like they have not been heard in a satisfactory way in the procurement. I've been representing clients in front of the courts saying that we have this framework agreement, it's exclusive, but you're procuring from someone else. You have the need, but you have the need, you have the agreement, but you're not procuring from us. So there is an issue of loyalty in these agreements. And there is also an issue on contracted volumes. Because when you do these procurements, normally they have not a fixed volume obligation, but they have an estimated volume. And normally when you then sell or provide with the offer, you have some sort of a unit cost. And the overhead costs are shared among a number of units. And normally the unit costs shared on a large number of units, it will be low. But they are not contractually bound to it. There's not a minimum purchase obligation in these agreements. So that's why I've added a question mark in brackets, both on loyalty, but also on the contracted volume. I see that quite often, both on pharmaceuticals, but also medical equipment, medtech, really. We see that quite often. But in general, dialogue with Sykehusinnkjøp works well. The advice from us, if there is a market dialogue, please participate. You have a voice, it needs to be heard, and in particular in relation to this GDPR issue, I've recently represented one of our clients for home care, and there was obviously a cloud solution which was provided, so how can we then arrange this procurement in order just to have our solution? Went into a one-to-one meeting with Sykehusinnkjøp. There was a negotiation, or there was a discussion at least, and then they ended up wanting a cloud solution, and there was only one provider of that cloud solution, and now they received the contract. So be proactive. That's the advice. They're not behind the wall. They need and they would like to have proactive supplies. That is Sykehusinnkjøp, and for your information, this is the front page. And I said to myself when I prepared this, or I didn't say it, said it to myself, but at least I thought it. Okay, it would be nice to go to Finland. An English presentation would be good. Okay, do they have an English text on the webpage? No. Most of their procurements are done in Norwegian, and there's a lot of their supplies which are from abroad, but no English web page is provided. So that is the web page. This is virtually an invitation, news on a seminar for supplies. These days, do you have this in Finland? Some Christmas things, which at least with a 4-year-old drives me crazy. It's called lussekatter, and they are eating them by large tomorrow. Okay, shall we go on? That is the centralized procurement authority in Norway, Sykehusinnkjøp. And we also have I will do this briefly, infrastructure IT. Okay? Norsk Helsenett. There's not that many who knows about Norsk Helsenett, but obviously there are infrastructure between the doctors or the GPs, hospitals, patient solutions, journals, and all that like. Norsk Helsenett is an important contracting authority in the healthcare sector. I've just mentioned on the second bullet point, there is currently a reorganization of e-health ongoing in Norway. Currently, there is a public tender out for e-health solutions, which could be interesting if I looked, and I did, looked at the attendee list. There are some of you which are most likely would be interested in this. There is a public tender ongoing. The Norwegian authorities notified the financing mechanism for the e-health solutions to the EFTA Surveillance Authority in May this year. The EFTA Surveillance Authority came out with a decision, decision number 919, in 10th of July this year, saying that there were no state aid involved in the financing mechanism. And that decision has now been appealed to the EFTA court in Luxembourg, where the two of us actually are representing one of the suppliers, because in effect, the market, if that decision stands and is being upheld, would be severely foreclosed. But that is more like of a state aid issue. But for your knowledge, there is an ongoing reorganization of Norsk Helsenett in the Norwegian market. I can provide you with more information on that, and you can circulate that to the attendees and others, I believe. And who others are there? I can also see from the attendee list that there are suppliers here who are basically working with home care, working with local municipalities, and so forth. And the municipalities, they are responsible for the primary care, whereas the Sykehusinnkjøp is responsible for specialist healthcare. So primary care is the responsibility of the regional and local municipalities. They are either doing it themselves, or they are organized as some sort of a procuring entities. So different municipalities are working together on their procurements, in effect the same as Sykehusinnkjøp, where they have centralized, or at least centralized on a regional or local level. They are doing a wide range of purchases. These are also approachable, but it's not like as systematic as Sykehusinnkjøp. In my view, most of these procurements are quite complex. They would like to be innovative, but there is, in my view, some sort of lack of skills and competence when, on the one hand, the 29th of November, you're responsible for procuring the nuts and bolts to the municipality, and the next day, you are responsible for an innovative home care solution. It's difficult. It's not specialized enough, in my view. But then, And also, as you might be aware, there is in Norway an ongoing debate. We have a conservative government, and there is a socialist opposition. And there is a discussion between in-house service providers on healthcare and outsourcing. And that's why I said here, is grandma up for grabs? And that picture. Because we can see in some of the municipalities around, which are at least governed by conservative parties, you have a wave of privatization of the healthcare sector, whereas in other socialist areas, they're in-house service providers. And there's not a policy question. Obviously, it is a policy question whether this is good or not. But from a legal point of view, the municipalities are not obliged to have that service on tender, but there's a lot of them who has, and when they have it, they are obliged to follow the EU regulations as implemented into the EEA agreement, and then again implemented into Norwegian law. So to sum up on the contracting entities and contracting authorities, central level, Sykehusinnkjøp, which are responsible for the specialist healthcare, national framework agreements. You have Norsk Helsenett, which is responsible for IT infrastructure. There is an ongoing reorganization. And then you have the local and regional municipalities who are responsible for primary healthcare, which is basically a wide range of services, which I know that several of you are interested in. Before we embark upon the next session, is there any general questions to the contracting authorities? As Sykehusinnkjøp, we are also approachable. No general questions? No proactivity? That's what the blogspot said. Sorry for that. Please, one question.
How much there is that kind of competition between publicly owned organizations and then between like, I mean, because here it seems like not only like providing healthcare services, that's an ongoing debate for sure, and political as well. But then what comes to like deploying, implementing new health IT systems, for example, there seems to be that kind of competition here that the public organizations set up an own organization providing those systems to them, and then there is then there are some tenders out. And now these are somehow competing against each other because the area or scale is not fully fixed. So actually, even though even those publicly owned organizations can extend their market share in a way, and then there are like public tenders to set up some system in some other region.
I understand basically your question as relates to the competitive environment and unequal equal treatment between public and private suppliers.
Yeah, and I think that it happens anyway.
Yeah.
You cannot say that, okay, is it equal or not?
It's within the EU treaty as well in the EEA agreement that public and private parties may compete with each other, and you are basically spot on, so to speak, on the reorganization of the e-health in Norway, because Norwegian authority, they have argued that is a market failure, which the market cannot fix itself. Thus, we need to have public ownership and public financing in the e-health infrastructure sector in Norway. But we see currently in certain market segments There are private suppliers doing well, large ones, small ones, or both small, mid caps and large caps doing well. But in the coming years, there will be more tenders and more in-house service production.
Okay.
At least that is the trend.
Yeah, that's good to know.
In my view. Then, in order to have the progress as well, I will give the floor to you, Kristina.
Yeah, thank you.
And how does it really work in Norway? It seems like you like to run.
Yeah. I do. So, moving away from this background information, the legislative field and the contracting authorities, we will now dive into the relevant procedures governing the Norwegian procurement processes. And we will have a look at the qualification requirements and award criteria. And along the way, I will also try to provide some tips and advices, like my colleague Espen has done. So, as a starting point in the Norwegian tender procedures, any interested party from any jurisdiction can participate. So, the key takeaway is that Finnish business entities, of course, you are welcome to participate in Norwegian public procurement processes. And these are the procedures that we have in Norway. You might know them from the Finnish public procurements. First of all, there's the open procedure, where anyone may submit a full tender. And this is the most frequently used procedure in Norway. And then there is the restricted procedure, where any interested party may ask to participate, but only those who are pre-selected may submit a tender. So while the open procedure is a one-step procedure, the restricted procedure is a two-step procedure. And the same goes for the rest of the procedures, the negotiated procedure, the competitive dialogue, and the innovation partnership. So for the negotiated procedure, only pre-selected bidders may submit a full tender, and then in the end, participate in the negotiations. And please note that the minimum requirements in the tender documents may never be negotiated. We will talk about award criteria later on. And the negotiated procedure is only meant to be used when it is necessary. So it must be necessary due to the specific or complex characteristics of the procurement. And while in the classic sector it has to be necessary, in the other sectors, like for instance in the defense and security sector, the contracting authorities may use this procedure as a standard procedure. But that is not relevant for you, I suppose. Then there's the competitive dialogue, where the contracting authority may open a dialogue with potential bidders on larger contracts. And in order to do so, it must be with the aim of proposing a method to solve a certain need defined by the contracting authority. And again, only bidders who are invited may submit a full tender. And so the benefits of the competitive dialogue is that it's quite a flexible procedure, and it's quite good to use when there are like complex projects related to infrastructure or bigger IT systems, etc. And then finally, there is the procedure, innovation partnership. And this procedure may be used when you have to purchase a good or a service that is not already available on the market. So this means you can read it from the text that it has to be an element of innovation. So for procurement to be innovative, it needs to introduce new or to significantly improve already existing goods or services or procedures on the market. And an agreement.
If I'm just going to add to that, Kristina, on the innovation partnerships, and that is in particular in home care, because as you may be aware, it's easier to have grandma at home than in an institution. And there are a lot of technical bits and pieces, systems, which can have make sure that grandma is safe at home. But there are also issues which question that, really. And on the innovation partnership, that has been a couple of 3 of those in the Norwegian market, in the home care sector, so to speak, in order to reduce the cost of home and primary care. That is a practical example on how to use this innovation partnership. There was the municipality of Stavanger on the west coast of Norway who carried out the first one and did it brilliantly in my view. Others are now embarking upon the same strategy as the municipality of Stavanger did.
Yeah. So these are the procedures. And then moving on, the question might occur, how do you find relevant information about tenders in Norway? I know my colleague Espen has touched a bit upon that subject, because the estimated annual value of Norwegian public procurements are more than 500 billion kroners, so the marketplace in Norway is quite substantial. And so both Norwegian and foreign bidders might participate. And if there are contracts subject to the public procurement regulation, it says act, but it's supposed to say regulation, part 2, exceeding the national threshold, you might easily find information by monitoring the DOFIN web portal. And then for contracts subject to the procurement part 3, exceeding the European Union threshold, then you can monitor the TED web portal. And the procurements which are exceeding both the national and the European Union threshold are published both at DOFIN and in TED. So this is the easiest way to find information about relevant procurements. And when the procurements are, advertised on these web pages, as you know, they must contain like a brief description of the procurement, the contracting authority, and the estimated value of the procurement. And these information bits and pieces must be published at latest at the same time as the competition tender documents are published. And then there's the question, where do you go from there? Like if you monitor DOFIN or the TED webpage, how do you find the relevant competitions for your business entity specifically? Well, in order to do that, we recommend that you subscribe to, for instance, email alerts for certain keywords, or that you subscribe for certain CPV codes, which you might know from Finland, because it's like a European standardized vocabulary system. So if you pay attention to these portals and you subscribe for the keywords and the CPV codes, you will probably have sufficient information in order to participate in the Norwegian public procurement market.
So what you are actually saying is that you can have an advanced search, isn't it?
That's right, yeah.
So you can say that I would like to have all public procurements carried out by Sykehusinnkjøp within the CPV codes which are relevant for you. Or all municipalities, which is some 419 or that like, but with the CPV codes relevant for your business. The same, as I understand, with Norsk Helsenett and others as well. So normally, the Norwegian contracting authorities, they are quite good at identifying the procurement in the correct CPV code. But if not, the procurement may become void because there might be suppliers which have subscribed to the correct CPV codes, which has not then been made aware of that the procurements are ongoing. So, with that being said, you know whether you are a supplier to the Sykehusinnkjøp, Norsk Helsenett, and then you can basically monitor those web pages. As I also mentioned, on the web page of Sykehusinnkjøp, you have a list of ongoing procurements. So it's basically just a way to monitor it. And if you have any questions, he's at the back there.
Yeah, and there are also some suppliers that offers online search tools and provides refined email alerts if you want to subscribe for it. Yeah, so of course we encourage you to use every tool in the toolbox, if you can use that expression. Yeah, and then the next subject is regarding qualification requirements. And as you might know, the purpose of qualification requirements is to make sure that the bidder has the necessary capacity in order to fulfill its obligations in accordance with the potential future contract. And the consequence, if the qualification requirements are not met, is that the bidder will be excluded. And this is regardless of the procedure which is used. And all of the qualification criteria or requirements, they must be objective and non-discriminatory criteria. So they must not lead to arbitrary discrimination, and they must be verifiable and relevant for the specific procurement. And then they are accompanied by documentation requirements. And by mentioning the documentation requirements, we would also remind you about the language barrier, which my colleague Espen was talking about, because most of the Norwegian tender documents, or most usually, they are in Norwegian. So you should be aware of this, and also know that even sometimes the contracting authority require even appendices following the qualification documentation requirements to be in Norwegian.
And the worst example is also that the dialogue or the negotiation meetings shall be conducted in Norwegian.
Yeah.
I've just, for the record, it's in a different area though, but I was representing a Spanish-Austrian joint venture, construction joint venture in Norway. There were some 20 people from the road administration on the one hand side. There were some 20 people from Spain and Austria on the other side. And they were invited for a negotiation meeting. You can think how that went. I was in the middle, representing this consortium, and it was like, the Spaniards, they were like, we need more information, we need more. And the Austrians, this is enough, this is enough, this is enough, we take this later. It was just like chaos. And the next dialogue meeting, we ended up with an interpreter who were sitting in the room doing the interpretation simultaneously. So that's not the way to do it. Sorry for interruption.
Oh, of course, it was useful.
We need to make some
progress.
We read how to impress Finns, so we're trying to.
Yeah. So by way of continuing, the procurement regulation in Norway, it sets out both mandatory and optional criteria in order for suppliers to be eligible to participate in the regulated contract award procedure. And so for contracts who are subject to the procurement regulation part 3, exceeding the EU threshold, the contracting authority may only demand that the suppliers fulfill qualification requirements related to the following, which are registration, authorizations, economic and financial capacity, and technical and professional qualifications. And of course, the requirements always has to be relevant for and proportionate to the procurement. And also in Norway, we make use of the standardized ESPD form. Yeah, sure, you have a question?
Toimii. Yeah, just to be sure, need to kind of ask about the language and the kind of the company country, the base of the company. I'm from Halton. We are building operating rooms, and name is Mikael Sokolnitsky. Can you give any comments on this or do I understand right that the company you cannot limit in the requirements that the company should be, for example, a Norwegian? It can be from any EU country. And then the second question, the requirements, as you a little bit stated here about language. If there is a requirement that the official language is Norwegian, what does that actually mean?
Indirect discrimination.
Sorry.
Indirect discrimination. That's what it actually means.
Well, it means you must find a translating service, perhaps.
The thing is that the documents are in Norwegian. The agreements are governed by Norwegian law. The contract is in Norwegian, often. And in effect, from a practical point of view, it means that you will engage with, as Christina says, a direct translator in order to translate your documents. Not official translations, notarized translation and that like, that's not the requirement. But it means basically that you need to provide the documents in Norwegian and have basically Norwegians representing you if you do not speak Norwegian yourself in these kind of meetings. And that's why I think it's so important for you to be proactive in the market dialogue, because they are not aware of you, and at least Sykesundkjøp often have these dialogues in English because they would like to attract foreign companies coming into Norway. So we are now basically talking about the legal requirements, but from a practical point of view, from time to time, and more often, we also experience English. And they accept other Scandinavian languages also, which is defined in Norway as, sorry for that, Danish, Swedish, Norwegian. You're part of the Nordics, but not part of Scandinavia, I understand.
Yeah.
Sorry for that.
That's right.
Did we answer your question?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Good.
Thanks.
So finally, you should also be aware that the contracting authority may limit the number of participants. This is applicable for the procedures, the negotiated procedure, restricted procedure, competitive dialogue, and innovation partnership. So for contracts subject to the procurement regulation part 2, the contracting authority must include at least 3 suppliers. And for contracts subject to the procurement regulation part 3, above the EU threshold, the contracting authority must include at least 5. But in the negotiated procedure and the innovation partnership, I think, they may include only, what was I saying here?
3.
3, yeah, 3, that's right. But if the contracting authority wishes to limit the number of participants, of course, they have to disclose this information in the tender documentation, so all of the suppliers are aware of this.
But before we go on to the evaluation and award criteria, if we just go one back. And I know that some of you in the room are like large multinationals with offices already in Norway, and some of you are startups would like to embark into Norway. And the qualification requirements, that are requirements related to, among others, financial capacity of the supplier. Not the product, but supplier, as it is in Finland. And then I also urge you to be proactive as startups in Norway, because to the extent you set a financial capacity of a company above a certain threshold, we are excluded. We cannot participate. You see what I mean? So you need to be in early to try to influence the qualification criteria, in particular in relation to financial capacity, in particular for startups. If you are like Abbott or Nestle or Baxter or whomever, obviously you have the mother company guarantee from the US. Doesn't matter really. But if you are a Finnish startup or a Swedish, German or whomever, it is utmost important that you are allowed to be in the competition in order to have your bid evaluated. Joni, please.
Yes, I was thinking this is related to the dialogue meetings before the actual tender is published. So my question is related, do all tenders have a dialogue meeting?
No, it do not, but you can always ask for it, and they have the discretionary power to say, no, we don't want to have a dialogue with the market, or they can say, fine, we will have a dialogue with the market. But it's the discretionary power. There's no obligation to have such a meeting in effect. So I guess that answered the question. Yeah.
Okay.
Sorry, one question.
Yeah.
Regarding the thresholds, also if you can repeat that one, but if there's a threshold for, say, whatever.
Thank you. So if there's a threshold for participating in the tender, is it negotiable in a way if we can demonstrate that it's not okay?
It's not like negotiable, because the consequence of a qualification evaluation, it's either or. Either you're qualified or you're not qualified. But you have a qualification requirement which needs to be supported by documentation. So if other documentation than a AAA from whomever, credit rating bureau, documents that you are creditworthy or you have the financial capacity, that would normally be sufficient. But it's not like the threshold itself or the financial capacity, when it's published as part of the documents, it's not negotiable. But the documentation requirements are neither negotiable, but at least give some indication that you actually are able to fulfill the contract. And if you're not able to fulfill the contract, at least you are creditworthy to be sued. Because that is basically the, the aim or the objective of not the procurement, but at least the qualification requirement.
Good. Then there's the next stage of the competition, the evaluation and the award criteria. So the contracting authority will evaluate the supplier's offers based on the award criteria stated in the tender documentation. And the award criteria are accompanied by documentation requirements, and the contracting authority has to inform all of the suppliers which weight is given to each criteria. For instance, you have price weighted at 60% and quality weighted at 40%. And then there's the risk of exclusion if the bid contains deviations from the award criteria and requirements. And if the bid contains deviations from the minimum requirements, the bid will be excluded for sure. But only if there are other deviations, the contracting authority has a right to exclude the bid. So this might happen under certain circumstances. And the award criteria, they must be objective, non-discriminatory, and most important of all, they must be suitable to identify the best tender. So for procedures subject to the Procurement Regulation Part 3, the contract award must be based on either price, cost, or the best relationship between price and quality. The best price-quality ratio, you might refer to it as. And for the procedures of the competitive dialogue and the innovation partnership, the contracting authority must base the evaluation of the offers on the best price-quality ratio.
In that sense, I also think it's important from a practical point of view, because that is the purpose of this workshop, so to speak, is that you are not better than your offer disclose. We have a huge amount of phone calls, clients coming in yearly saying, this is wrong. We are much better than this. And I say, fine. Then we need to see your tender documents. And when evaluating the tender documents, you haven't basically answered the questions. You haven't done it correctly. So take at least one, or hope you will take several things from this workshop or presentation, but read the instructions carefully. Make sure that you provide all the documentation required, and also make sure to write as good as possible the solutions and explain the solutions you are providing. And understand, just the example we had in the hotel this morning, one of our clients has been, there's a question whether, whether something is a minimum requirement or not. And then you need to interpret is this a minimum requirement or isn't it? Because if it is a minimum requirement, it's either fulfilled or not. Okay? And it was said it was an A requirement, and A requirements was either fulfilled or not. Whereas the contracting authority said in their documents just what I said now, but have evaluated the minimum requirements. So when it was fulfilled, you have been then given a certain evaluation on a scale. It's not like either or. So please, when enter into procurements, either in Finland, Norway, or elsewhere, read carefully the instructions. Because there is a number of rejections and losses, if you could call it that, being made due to bad work on behalf of the suppliers. That's a fact, and you can argue as hard as you will, but at the end of the day, you're not better than your offer disclose. It's harsh words, but it's true. Do you understand that? Yes, fine. Sorry for that. One question at the side here.
Regarding the competitive procedure,
Competitive dialogue?
dialogue,
Yeah.
so the field has a dilemma and they want to discuss. Where do they publish these problems or issues or challenges that, hey, in our healthcare business we have this huge dilemma and we don't really see any solutions on the field? How do they contact the market?
Yes, that's a good question. Just to repeat for the audience on the web, the question was related to a competitive dialogue and or innovative tender. Normally you have either a functional description of what you need, and then you are basically can yourself describe what kind of function it needs, or you have a need description. And it's done in a normal way. You publish it either on Dolphin or on TED. And in that sense, you basically state the objective of the tender, what we need to have in place, and you either opt for a competitive dialogue or an innovation process, and then you enter into a dialogue with the market, and at some stage you decide, okay, fine, now I'm able to describe the technical solution or the functional description of the service, and then you go into the market. So it's basically just a way. It's more like it's on the way to a procurement, but everything starts with a publication. New question.
Recently, I noticed a request for interest,
Yeah.
Which we signed up, but the odd thing was it was partially Norwegian, partially English.
Yeah.
What does that indicate? Because I've seen in other countries where sometimes even it's spelled out loud, like, look, this company has, preference. But if it's then done in, let's say, partially Norwegian, partially English, does it indicate something that they prefer Norwegians?
As a lawyer, we do not speculate in facts. That being said, it depends. It depends really. In my view, I won't say either or, but it's strange that you have parts of the documents in Norwegian, parts in English. That being said, at least it seems like there will be some sort of a foreign interest, at least. which I believe since you have part taken. Yeah, good. Yes, sorry,
Yeah.
please.
Cool. I think we can just move on. So when it comes to the evaluation methodology, the contracting authority is not obliged to disclose this in the tender documentation, but at latest before opening the tenders, the contracting authority has to stipulate his methodology. And for contracts above the EU or the EEA threshold, 1.3 million kroners, the contracting authority must notify all tenderers of the weight given to the criteria, which we mentioned in the beginning. And in the end, when there's been a contract award based on the award criteria and the award requirements, the contracting authority must notify the bidders of the contract award decision. And this must include a standstill period of at least 10 days, a description of the relative benefits of the office which was chosen, etc. And then in the end, we were just going to talk a bit about how do you work with the tender in an effective way. We would just like to inform you of this web portal, anskaffelser.no, where the Norwegian Public Authority provides a lot of information and guidance on how to conduct public procurements and how to participate. And some information, at least the last time I checked, was actually available in English. So that's a good sign. And then you should also make sure that you have sufficient information about delivering the tenders, like do you know enough about the electronic tools, and then there's the language requirement again. Regarding the language requirements and the award criteria, which we were just talking about, you should know that the Norwegian tender documents are quite wordy. So for instance, the award criteria quality, when the contracting authority introduces this award criteria, they expect that the suppliers will write a lot on this criteria just to show that they have like task awareness, and they will be given points based on this. And then in the end, we've been talking about this actually, I think. Yeah, you should seize the opportunity for dialogue, etc. And yeah, use the tools available to surveillance the market. But yeah, we haven't said you should always ask questions if you are wondering about something, and do it within the deadline within the deadline.
For the Q&A sessions.
Yeah, it's a bit late in the afternoon. Because if you...
Is it?
Yeah, because if you make assumptions or this or that, or you have deviations, that might be a sure way to get rejected in our experience.
Yeah.
So that's about it.
Yes, just to sum up on Christine's bit, we talked about the most important things, qualification requirements, which objective is to qualify the supplier. The result of a qualification evaluation is either or. You're either qualified or you're not. The qualification requirements are done in relation to documentation. Please be aware to read the documentation carefully, provide what is required. Then you are qualified, hopefully, and then you are moving on to the award procedure. And there is some sort of a game chance of strategy in the sense that how many percentage is price, quality, environment, and that like. But also there is documentation requirements. And please make sure to read those instructions carefully. If something is unclear, use the opportunity to ask questions in the Q&A session prior to bid submission. The consequence of doing that would be to have a more clear picture of what you actually are delivering on. And another thing, make sure to have as less reservations to either the technical specifications or the contractual or the contract itself, because you will run the risk of being rejected. So it's some sort of a risk approach to these kind of projects. We have had clients who have committed themselves to a 99% delivery grade and are able to deliver like 92. And the contract are being in default within 3 to 4 weeks. So please make sure, have the documents in place and have the risk assessment also in place. Then we will, before the question, or after the question? After the question. Joni, up and run. Or you have it yourself.
I have it already here. I don't know if maybe you already took it up in your presentation, but is there any kind of rules or limitations or requirements how many offers you need to have on the table at the end? Or is it enough if there is only one applicable offer, or do they need to have 3 or 5 or something like that?
The thing is, and for the audience on the web, the question was related to how many offers you need to have at the end before awarding. And the contracting authority, they may annul a competition if there's only one left. They may, they're not required to. So if that is an offer which has a good ratio between quality and price, they may accept it and sign the documents, or sign the contract. But they may also annul and have a new competition. So you don't have like a requirement if you're the one bidder left to have the contract signed. And that is a bit annoying often.
Yeah, so it is possible that there can be only one offer from the early beginning also in the competition,
Yes.
and it can win and
Yes.
be approved. Yeah.
Yeah. I think I answered your question.
And can we just add that if there's an open procedure and you only receive like 1 or 2 offers and they are not acceptable, you may transform the open procedure into a negotiated procedure.
Yeah.
So it's a bit more flexible then.
And then, yes, and then just to take you towards the finish line, when the award decision is made, who has the best price, the lowest cost, or the best ratio between cost and quality, or price and quality? I, at least inside my head, divide between, on the one hand, the winning bids and the loser bids. In the sense that either you sit still or you may rock the boat. Okay, because between the award and the signing and the contract is entered into when it's signed, not before, but when it's signed, it's entered into. In that 10-day time span, you have a lot of possibilities. And I will use the last 10-15 minutes to talk about these possibilities and also answer questions.
One more question, if you may.
Yes, please.
Regarding the, let's say, award criteria. So if there's a kind of a price quality thing, so what we've seen is that sometimes there's a price is like 40%, and then there might be some quality things, technical specifications, yada, 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 60% or so, or then there might be that the price is 100%.
Yeah.
Are there any rules or guidelines in the Norwegian law that there should be price weighting something like 40, 60, 80%? Or is it totally up to the authority to decide upon that?
You do have a discretionary power as a contracting authority to decide the competition or to design the competition yourself. So you may opt for 100% price, or you may opt for a ratio regime. And then within that ratio regime, you have a fairly large discretion. First, when picking the evaluation criteria and also supply them with their required weight. But when it comes to environment, we had a debate in the Norwegian Parliament that to the extent you will have environment as a criteria, you should have a minimum of 30%. At least that's what the politicians are stating. But that's not applicable law. That's more like a political wish and an objective rather than an obligation. Okay? Another question? You need a microphone.
Oh yeah, thanks. Is it always quality, price to quality
No.
evaluation, or can it be also like quality to price? You know what I mean? I mean how those competing tenders are evaluated against
You have,
each other.
and for the audience again, the question relates basically, as far as I understand, to the evaluation criteria and how they are put together.
Yeah, because traditional way is to convert everything into quality points in a way,
Yep.
or scoring. But there are also new ways of evaluating, like economical value of it, and then it would be quality to price conversion before evaluating the competing
Yeah, that is also
tenders.
applicable in Norway. But
Okay.
the normal way to do it, at least within your sectors, would be to have a normal evaluation, in the sense that you have a bowl, so to speak, or a wide variety of qualification, award criteria, which is relevant to what is being procured.
Yeah.
And then you put weight to those criteria, and then you have a broad discretion or a discretionary power to evaluate those criteria. But that discretionary power, when those are set and published, the discretionary power is gone.
Yeah.
Okay?
Thank you.
Thanks. Then, enforcement. So, what's the situation? The award letter has come out. Either I have been awarded the contract, and happy as can be, or I've lost the contract, and what to do. Okay? And I believe you've been in both situations. Okay? So one of the issues which is not up here is basically to accept the award. Fine, I understand it. I wasn't good enough. It was much of a risk, so I put a high price. And you accept the award. But if you not accept the award, what are your alternatives? And I've listed basically 4 groups of alternatives with 3 bullet points under each group. First of all, and that is I would say, not a normal thing to do, but at least it's an opportunity for you to do, and that is to file a formal complaint to the client or to the contracting authority. Okay? That is what I call a normal administrative procedure. And obviously it depends on the conduct of the contracting authority, what would be the grounds for this complaint, and that needs to be assessed. But that complaint needs to be filed prior to signing. Because once the contract is signed, you will not get that contract. That will, for all practical purposes, be converted into a claim in front of the court for damages. So to the extent you would like to have that contract, react early. In the so-called standstill period, which is 10 days. And how, just a second, and how do we get this information? What is the mistakes being done? What is the mistakes being done in relation to the contractual documentation, to the negotiations, to evaluation of the other bidders? And in that sense, our advice would be to get as much information as possible on the other bidders through the administrative act. Because once the award letter is sent out, the other bids are made public, with, obviously, the exception of business secrets. And I will not go into details of what contains a business secrets or not, but that is a huge debate. So when you deliver a bid in Norway and you win, you will most likely have a complainant or another party in the procedure asking for access to your bid. That is normal, and you are allowed to retract business secrets. And if you need some information on what a business secret is, we are more than willing to help you. But at the end of the day, that is related to the solution being provided, the price provided, and that like. You had a question here, and we need a microphone.
Could we kindly have the question in the end?
Are you tired now?
I am timing at the moment, yes.
You're timing or tired?
I am timing.
Sorry.
So if
we'll move on.
kindly asking all the questions in the end of the presentation,
Thanks.
please.
Fine. And if you are successful with the complaint, everything is fine. But in Norway, we also have a public procurement complaint board, which is being now you are pushing me on time as well. I just need to couple of minutes. We have a public procurement complaint board, which is being set by the government, consisting of 7+, both lawyers, practicing lawyers, academia, professors from the university, and also judges, who are providing advisory opinions on the procurement in question. You can either have that as a fast-track procedure, if that is agreed between the contracting authority and the complainant, as we had this morning, or it is a normal procedure. And a fast-track procedure is like 2.5 months, and a normal procedure is more than a year. And I underpin, it is advisory opinions. The sanctions, there's basically none, except for if there has been a tender which was supposed to be made public in TED or DOFIN, but has not been. You have some sort of a fee, which is maximized at 15% of the contractual value. But that is also an alternative. The third alternative, and that is being more used in Norway now than before. In Sweden, this is like daily life. In Sweden, it's like massive complaints, massive court proceedings, at least how we know. In Norway, it's not like massive, but it's growing. And with the new directive, or it's not even new anymore, but with the directives from the EU providing for efficiency on enforcement, they have the so-called suspensive effect. So if an interim measure, an application for an interim measure, is handed down in the court prior to signing, it's not allowed to sign the contract until that court has handed down a decision a couple of weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, 2 months later. But that is, as it says, it's interim in effect. So it's just interim. Normally, the procuring authorities respect interim judgments or interim orders from the court. And if you're not successful in the first instance, it might be on appeal. But on appeal, you do not have the suspensive effect, and the contracting authority will then have the possibility to sign, and you will lose your so-called locus standi, which is a possibility to have the court have the case in the appeal court. It is written and oral proceedings in court. It is basically these three. The first one with a complaint, the second with a complaint to KOFA, and the third one with an interim measure in front of the ordinary courts. That is the most used alternatives in Norway today. But to the extent the contract is signed, it was wrongful. It was misconduct. This contract is so important. I would like to have this contract. Or at least, I would make a huge profit on this contract. So I claim for damages. Okay? Do you see that? So you have the possibility with the enforcement directives from the EU to have an annulment of the contract. It's being entered into, it's being signed, and it may be annulled and reversed by the court. We had 3 of these cases in Norway within the last 3 years, and it's not much. What we also had, we don't have had the annulment cases, but there has been an increasing amount of damages claims, either for profits, also loss of profits, or for costs. So if you can substantiate that without this mistake, I would have got this contract and I would have lost X%, you may have a claim in court. The last case was just outside of Oslo, south of Oslo. We have this big railroad tunnel. It was awarded to the Spanish Condotte wrongfully, and the Swedish Skanska, they claimed for damages towards the contracting authority, and the contracting authority needed to pay the loss of profits to Skanska, and it was amounted to 289 million Norwegian kroner. So basically you paid for the work twice. And at the end of the day, also the Condotte, they went bankrupt, so they paid even more. Or, which is more normal, is compensation for cost. A lot of these procurements, you have man hours, which have some sort of a value. Yourselves are sitting down, make your efforts to do your best efforts. You might use lawyers in order to pursue your claims, other technical advisors. All those kind of costs may be recovered, either accepted by the contracting authority or handed down by the court. And that would obviously be enforceable. That is also, in Norway, a written and an oral procedure. So to sum up, we have briefly touched upon the Norwegian regulations and its relation to the EU and EU directives. We have touched upon the contracting authorities. We have touched upon the qualification and the award criteria. And we've also touched upon, now, the enforcement of the public procurement procedures in 1.5 plus 4 or 5 minutes. So with that, we would like to thank you for your attention and looking forward to see you as suppliers in the Norwegian healthcare market. Thank you. And then there were some questions, obviously.
In the previous presentation about Sweden a few weeks ago, it was mentioned that when you submit a proposal that you can indicate if something is company secret or not. Do you need to do the same here in Norway?
You are not obliged to, if you're not asked to, but you may do. But at the end of the day, you will always be asked if there is an application for access to your file. You'll be asked later.
Okay.
So you're not obliged to do so.
Then a follow-up, as you're the lawyer, you always look at the bad case scenario, but let's say you win.
I always look at the win case.
Okay, good. Let's say you win the tender, but it is contested. Should the one who originally won also lawyer up? Or is there any obligations that the person that, the company that originally won, do they have any legal obligations during the
thing is that it depends. And I'm not here to sell legal service, but it depends. If you are in a foreign jurisdiction and you have the question of business secrets coming up because of access to file and that like, I would advise you to lawyer up. Or if there is an interim injunction in front of the courts, you have won the contract, you might either choose to sit still or you may intervene in favor of the contracting authority. That depends on a case-to-case basis, but in large contracts, we've seen at least a trend that also the winning bid is lawyering up and is represented in front of the courts as an intervener in favor of the contracting party. Of the contracting authority. More questions? There's two, one here and one at the back.
I had my original question when you were talking about that first of the four. So if there was a announcement of the awarding party, but the others did not get their, let's say, rejection notifications until later, or if the window of opportunity to, question it is too small, then do you jump to this fourth option?
No, what we normally do, and I understand your question as more like how to strategically maneuver within this 10-day period. And my advice would be always ask for an extension of the standstill period as early as possible, because they are not obliged or they are not allowed to sign prior to the standstill expiry of the standstill period. So if they are the contracting authority, like they are, if the contracting authority extend that deadline, you have the scope of maneuver. But if not, you will need to move to and decide whether or not to pursue the case as an interim measure in order to have the suspensive effect. That's the alternative if the contracting authority do not move on the standstill.
I'm just wondering because, there are complaints and everything. What are the ways how the procuring organizations improve their ways of doing procurement? That's because I'm wondering that we have been supporting some procuring organizations by providing our usability assurance and scoring services to them. So do you see any market for those kind of services in Norway?
Most likely, but we can take that afterwards.
Okay, thanks.
It's not like a general question, is it? No. Okay, is there any other questions? If not, I believe there's some coffee and some sweets. Or if you won't have any concluding remarks, Joni?
No more questions?
No.
Thank you, Espen. Thank you, Christina. I hope you all agree with me that this was extremely interesting. I thought also that I know, after doing the public procurement for 1 year, I would know everything, but there was also new information for me. So it was really good to know. But we can have now...
you are confused on a high level.
Yes.
Then our task is a mission accomplished, so to speak.
Definitely.
But we can now grab some coffee and cake. And if there is anyone who did not receive my business card, please grab my hand and I will give it to you. If you want to get the contact details to these two guys, I recommend to take a picture or ask a business card.
Will this presentation be sent out?
Yes.
Fine.
So everybody will get your contact details. And let's continue small talking. Finns are the best in this.
That's actually, that was, I didn't dare to mention it, but you did it yourself, so now I can continue. As at least this 30-year-old blogger said, small talk in Finland is sometimes no talk. And that's accepted. Is that correct? Yes. No, sir. Fine, thank you.